Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you're joining us from. We'd like to welcome you to day 3 of the Women in Transport Conference, where we are focusing on solutions that focus on supporting, challenging, and inspiring people to take sustainable actions. So our today's topic is climate action in the transport sector, stroke integrated mobility and affordable and clean energy. We'd like to appreciate the partners who have made this possible. I am Eve Gathua from Kenya, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. In today's panel, we have Lydia Kimani, and Lydia, you are okay to start the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Evelyn. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon once again, participants. I am delighted to be participating in the Women in Transport Africa Conference 2021. And my name is Lydia Kimani. I am the Agribusiness Liaison at the Society of Crop Agribusiness Advisors, SOCA. SOCA is a membership organization that is of consultants in the agriculture space, providing extension and advisory services to farmers across and value chain actors across the various crop value chains in the country. Aside from advisory and extension, we also combine our work with policy advocacy, and we are members of KEPSA and other various advocacy platforms in the climate change. In the climate change space, we are members of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance Environment Sector Board. We represent SOCA. We are also members of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, where I'm a co-convener of the Climate Finance. And I'm also a council member at the International Relations Society of Kenya, where we are looking at how can diplomacy support climate action. So through our environment diplomacy pillar of the Kenya foreign policy. So that is in a nutshell what Lydia is about. So my area of focus today will be climate action in the transport and logistics node of agriculture value chains. And we are able to appreciate how transport plugs in supporting the various activities in the agricultural value chain, whether it is delivering inputs, transporting produce to the markets, and even to processing plants and ultimately to the consumers. So we'll be able to look into how is the interrelation between agriculture, transport, and even the cross-cutting issue of gender feed into all these issues. So without much ado, I will go straight into my presentation. So that is like I had described. And we will start off with a brief background to just appreciate both the agriculture and transport sectors independently, then look at a nexus of the agriculture and transport value chains. From there, we will look at how does gender weave into this whole conversation. Then as a result, we are going to now we're going to look into how can these interactions inform our way forward, and going forward from the Women in Transport conference, what are some of the advocacy issues we can already pick up as different partners to pursue to ensure that e-mobility, the profile of e-mobility and low-cost transport solutions in the country become mainstreamed in across the sectors, and especially the agriculture sector. So that is a brief bio of what I had just shared at the introductory part. And so to begin with, we need to start by appreciating the role of agriculture in the country. So it contributes about a third of the GDP and provides employment to 70% in the rural communities. So again, 80% of our production is by smallholder farmers who have limited access to extension services. It also, in totality, whether it is crop, livestock rearing, fish farming, provides a livelihood to 12 million Kenyans. Then over 80% of the labor in the agriculture sector is provided by women, and the bulk of the produce is transported to the market using different various forms. Then aside from this, the crops subsector comprises 60% of total agricultural produce in the country. And aside from this, from an economic angle, a significant percentage of the farming community is bracketed as the poor, that is living below $1 a day. And finally, the sector is the leading in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, which are pegged at 43%. So these are going to be very critical because they are going to inform and our conversation going forward. That brief background is going to set the tone for how we build up from here. So next, we are also going to look at the transport sector in the country. So transport as a sector contributes 15% to GDP. So then Kenya serves as a transportation hub for the EAC region, especially the landlocked countries. We are looking at Burundi. We are also looking at Rwanda. So they depend very heavily on Kenya for their exports and their imports too. So 70% of agricultural produce is transported on road, and this is by a World Bank study. And this is specifically in Africa. In addition, we notice that there's a lack of incentives, especially in the transport sector, to support commercialization of new facilities. So that is information coming in from the agriculture sector transformation and growth strategy. So 90% also of international trade is done through shipping, and a significant part of this is agricultural produce, which is bulk commodity transported through maritime. That we have coffee and avocado specifically from Kenya using this particular route. Then in addition, domestic transportation of agricultural commodities is predominantly by road, while exports use road, air, and maritime. So this also is going to be very critical to help us just appreciate that while agriculture is a leading sector in the contributor of GDP, transport is also a follows closely. But you realize that with agriculture now, it relies very heavily on the transport sector to get inputs to farmers on time and to ensure produce gets to consumers and to the manufacturing plants on time to reduce the cost of doing business. So next, we are going to look at what is the nexus of agriculture and transport in climate action. So we realize that agriculture and transport are the top emitters of greenhouse gas emissions in the country. Agriculture is at 43%, and transport is well above 20%. So you realize that the transportation component of agriculture is a significant contributor to GHG, aside from the emissions coming from organic waste in the agriculture sector. So this therefore raises the need to address the transport services in the agriculture value chains as a way of ensuring that emissions are reduced. So in addition, they are significant contributors in terms of economic value, because you realize that while one is providing food security, employment, the other one ensures that different sectors, whether it is raw material from the agriculture, from the farms, gets to the processing plant for value addition in good time, and ultimately to the retail outlets for consumers in a reliable way. Then there is also both sectors have significant exclusion of gender and especially women. And this is because for the women in agriculture, you find that they are mostly concentrated in the low value activities, that is the production. In transport, which is a predominantly male dominated economic livelihood, as a source of economic livelihood, you find that a lot of women will shy away from investing, and also even given the amounts of incomes or revenues that are required for investments. So this is a critical similarity in both sectors, that and given the focus of the SDGs in terms of gender equality, this is something that needs to be considered even as we have this conversation. Then the transportation of both inputs and produce to the market is one of the largest transaction costs in agricultural production. So you find that in some countries, for example, in Central America, from a World Bank research, it pegs it at 35%. So therefore, this raises the need to address the issue issue of the transport services in the agriculture sector, to be able to ensure that to ensure that, first of all, we are reducing, even as we invest into low carbon transport solutions, then we are able to quantify the amount of emissions the transport services is a reduction in emissions that the transport services is contributing to the agriculture sector. So next, we are going to look at the state of play in terms of gender inclusion in transport services. So like I had indicated earlier, women will participate in low value activities in the agricultural value chain. This is predominantly production. So you find that we rarely have women either having transportation fleets or logistics companies, or even just, not even just the companies, even the vehicles or motorbikes. It is very rare that you find that women are the owners of these kinds of assets, which are very critical in agricultural value chains. So you find that this is predominantly because of their inability to have access to resources that could serve as collateral. For example, land title deeds that could be used to procure maybe vehicles or even motorbikes. So they have no access to that kind of collateral. And then because of the care economy, the burden of domestic work, they're not able to be fully dedicated in sections or transportation sections. Then we also have the issue of literacy levels. So this has also compromised the ability of women to move up the higher value activities in agricultural value chains. So you find that in terms of digital literacy, for example, we find that women still suffer significant literacy levels. So that by extension also compromises the ability to move up the higher value activities. Then we find that again, women, transportation being a predominantly male dominated sector, then we have minimal participation of the women. So you also find that sometimes even the logistics that are involved in the transport sector, sometimes there's night travel and there are issues of security. So those are some of the things that we would make women hesitate to venture into these kinds of economic opportunities. Then we have also the lack of information on the transition to low carbon transport solution. So we have inadequate extension services presently in the country. So even women who are farmers and may have even the capacity to invest may not be aware of these kinds of opportunities. So if there is that issue of availability of information through extension services is addressed, we may start seeing a lot more women coming into this space and leveraging on the economic opportunities that e-mobility, for example, presents. Then again, there's the lack of resources to invest in e-mobility opportunities. So you find that their incomes, because of participating in the low value activities, are also minimal, and therefore by the time they accumulate sufficient incomes to acquire assets that are required in the transport sector, it may take a bit of time. In addition, agriculture is one of the poorest financed sectors in our country, and according to the ASTGS, this figure is at 2%. So by extension, and because women lack the requisite collateral, it further puts them at a greater disadvantage. So these are some of the things that would be preventing women from venturing again into this space. Then you find that the nature of production at the smallholder level is very fragmented. So we have individual farmers producing using different types of inputs. So therefore, it is not even possible to aggregate produce. So you find that eventually smallholder farmers have to find individual ways to market their produce, which is very expensive, and by extension contributes to that the very high transaction cost in terms of transport service. In addition, because of women lacking significant incomes, you find that a lot of them will either transport produce to the market on foot or by bicycles or motorbikes, because they're not, maybe, for example, they are not able to afford pickup trucks that would be more efficient in transporting their produce. So when you look at the intersection of these issues, agriculture and the transport services in the agriculture sector from a gender lens, then we realize that this has already, the women are significantly marginalized. So when we look at now the transition the country is making to low carbon transport solutions, we realized that it could further marginalize the women because it requires significant understanding of the technologies and appreciation of the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So it means that for transition to low carbon transport solutions, there is a significant sensitization, and especially to the women in the agriculture space, on the opportunities that this transition presents for us to also be able to appreciate some of this. We also realize that fragmented nature may compromise. So we may want to consider that as we proceed with the transition to e-mobility, are we able to organize women into cooperatives of farmers or farmer groups that are able now to pool resources and enjoy economies of scale, and eventually raise sufficient funding to invest in e-mobility for the transportation of their produce to the different market segments. So these are some of the things that we will need to reflect on as we continue. So given that, as in some of the given that kind of background reflection, these are some of the things that are going to be very critical to consider and adopt going forward, to ensure that as we make the transition to low carbon transport solutions, that critical sectors like agriculture and women especially in these spaces do not miss out on this transition, because ultimately we realize that if it is inclusive and it factors in critical sectors with their contribution to GDP, then ultimately you are able to get buy-in from more sectors to adopt e-mobility for reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So to begin with, one of the things we need to look into very seriously is how can we explore the use of frontier technologies, for example, big data analytics for planning and investment. So how are we able to leverage on big data to understand, for example, which value chains are very transport services heavy, which regions of the country, and then from there, this information, once collected by government, can be relayed to the private sector through the different associations, for example, KEPSA, KNCCI, and the like, for investment opportunities. Then that way, investors are able to very quickly understand that transport services in a particular value chain, for example, the horticulture, is very lucrative, and there are and as a result we see more and more and not just investment in transport services, but clean transport service solutions. So these are some of the things that we will technology can be leveraged in that way. Then again, we need to look at how can we leverage the incentive schemes in the proposed national policy on green fiscal framework to catalyze the uptake of e-mobility in the agriculture sector. So the National Treasury is in the process of developing the green fiscal framework, and so that different sectors of the economy can already propose what are some of the incentive schemes that they see most lucrative and most beneficial to the sectors in terms of driving investments. So one of the agriculture, but this is an area that the agriculture sector could leverage, and now transport services in agriculture sector that embrace e-mobility could be seen as a green service. And then and then as a follow-up, we will be able to raise the profile of e-mobility as a green service now, because it is helping reduce the emissions along the supply chain. And this has become very critical, especially for our export markets in Europe, that have now placed a demand that everyone who is exporting to Europe must demonstrate the greening of their supply chains. So we can start already orienting our agriculture sector through transport services in this direction through e-mobility. Then we need to promote the development of standards through KEBS and certification for e-mobility for increased uptake. So once you have standardized, for example, bikes and vehicles, this is something that could drive the manufacturing, and by extension, sectors like agriculture would be great beneficiaries, because if you have these kinds of vehicles, motorbikes being locally assembled, then it means even the cost of transportation as a result is going to come down. So players and agriculture sector players are going to be they need to participate very strongly on this, given the benefit they stand to reap. We have also seen the COVID pandemic has increased delivery demand for delivery services for groceries, for example. The increased the drive for embracing e-commerce, even for shopping. We have seen now a lot of the middle class doing their orders for groceries online. So we also need to ensure that we in the agriculture sector, the modes of transport that we are using to ensure that these deliveries are done on time are green and are not increasing the carbon footprint of the sector by extension. So in that light, COVID-19 has become a blessing in disguise for fast tracking of some of these solutions in the agriculture sector. Then we also need to ensure that decision-making processes are inclusive. And this is, for example, to ensure that even as we design e-bikes, are these female friendly? Can women feel comfortable to now even just invest and become riders themselves? Or even how are we making sure that the designs of what we are bringing into the market are friendly? So these are some of the things that we need to consider. In addition, we need to also understand, do we need specific incentives to catalyze women participation in the e-mobility space, and especially now focusing on the agriculture sector? How can we use e-mobility to move women from low value activities like production into participating in the transport and logistics node of agriculture sector? Then eventually, we are also looking at promoting commercially oriented cooperative societies so that this way they are able, smallholder farmers are able to raise sufficient money that can be invested into e-mobility. So for example, we find that as farmers come together in a cooperative, they're able to invest or buy trucks that are using clean energy, or even use motorbikes that embrace that are electric in nature, or that have that are not using the the internal combustion engines. So this way you're also able to disseminate information more effectively and at a reduced cost, because now this way you're also sensitizing farmers in a group, which for us, for example, like SOCA, as extension service providers, this is something that would be very keen on, because dispensing extension services to individual farmers is extremely expensive and becomes a disincentive even for the providers. Then finally, we need to look at a way in which identify how can we use platforms such as the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is a free trade agreement for Africa, to catalyze the uptake of e-mobility, for example, in the regions of the East African community and by extension, the continent. So you find that under the Trade in Services protocol, transport has been prioritized as a tool and as a catalyst for fast tracking regional integration. So one of the things that African governments have agreed on is that transportation needs to be prioritized so that we can see the development of the infrastructure, the road network. So even as governments embark on investment in infrastructure, how can we ensure that regional integration by extension now is also catalyzing the uptake of clean transport across borders in the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement? And because the AfCFTA is being implemented through regional blocks, we can already start with Kenya being a hub of, in the EAC. How is Kenya leveraging its position in the East African community to catalyze other member states to start moving towards the transition to e-mobility? And this is going to be very critical because all African economies rely on agriculture for significantly for their economic growth and development. So therefore, this creates a very strong nexus and a strong justification on how we can use this particular trade agreement to drive low carbon transport solutions in the continent, in the region, and ultimately even support the country ambition. So these are some of the references that I used in preparing my slide that could be of interest to participants. going forward. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. I'd like again to appreciate Women in Transport Africa Conference for this particular opportunity. And thank you. I am very grateful, and I look forward to the Q&A to learn more. Bye-bye.
So thank you so much, Lydia, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you for, bringing in, agriculture and making us see how it is intertwined with transport. Thank you for reminding us that women need to be involved in transport decision-making skills so as to make all these policies to be gender inclusive, and also that women need to be highly sensitized to sustainable low carbon transport, to sustainable low carbon transport. Yeah, so I will go on with my presentation. So today we are going to talk about accelerating climate action through sustainable approaches, and we're going to look at Nairobi City in Kenya. So my name, as I had said earlier, I'm Evelyn Gathua, and I work at Sustainable Transport Africa, which is an NGO in Kenya that focuses on sustainable transport and development through promoting and lobbying for non-motorized transport, bus rapid transit systems, light rail transit systems, traffic demand management, transit orient development, cleaner fuels, and electromobility. And we do this so as to reduce the environmental impacts and health impact that result from the transport sector. So my background is in environmental studies. So from Kenyatta University, I am a member of the International Association for Impact Assessment, Environmental Institute of Kenya, and I'm also a registered and a licensed NEMA associate expert. So yeah, and I am a great advocate for platforms that create structures that support sustainability. Thank you. The next slide. So to start off my presentation, I'm going to first give a brief background on transport and climate change. And one of the importances of transport is that we are able to access different activities and participate in life. You're able to go to school, you're able to go to work, you're able to go for shopping, and all this is because of transport. And to continue is saying that transport is still reliant on fossil fuels. Example is the petrol, diesel, gasoline, and we are saying that 73% of this transport accounts for 73% of transport energy used, and that energy is from the fossil fuels. And they say that when you continue to burn fossil fuels, they emit greenhouse gases, and we've seen some of the effects that emanate from greenhouse gases. They result to global warming, climate change, and as we continue to experience some of the climate change effects as a result of greenhouse gases, we have seen the melting of icebergs, which results to rising in sea levels, which results to displacing people who live along the coastal lines. We have experienced extreme weather events. Sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too cold, and also the changing rainfall patterns, which have affected farmers that they are not able to predict the planting seasons. And we're saying that this extreme effects of climate change, they are predicted to continue being severe in developing countries, because they do not have resources. They do not have enough resources to adapt. And whereas there are resources to adapt to these effects, these resources are being used to, they're being averted to build resilience in fighting pandemics. For example, right now we are fighting COVID-19. So as we look at Nairobi City, we're saying Nairobi is the capital city in Kenya, and right now the urbanization rate in Kenya is growing, and especially in Nairobi. Currently we have 4 million settlements in Nairobi, Kenya, and we're seeing that 3/4 of Kenyans, they use public transport. And just as you can see, I have some pictures with me in my slide. So this picture, you can see the buses, This is a street. This is along one of the streets in Nairobi City. We have public transportations, and as you can see, there's a lot of congestion. This congestion, in turn, results to air pollution. Air pollution, which leads to respiratory diseases. With this congestion, of course, you can expect a lot of road accidents because there are no dedicated lanes for cyclists, for for people who are walking. There are a lot of accidents within the city, and with this congestion, you can also expect cases of increased crimes, because when the people are congested in one area, there are a lot of pickpocketers and all this. And you're saying as the rate of urbanization being high, you can expect the ownership of private motorized cars to be high. One, because number one, public transportation is not reliable in Kenya, with a lot of congestion, even inside the vehicles. In Kenya, you're told to songea mwenzako, even if the vehicle is still full, you're still told to push for your neighbor. And you see that this is one of the drivers of making people to buy motorized vehicles. And we're saying that the government needs to encourage sustainable use of urban resources by investing in green transportation infrastructure and renewable energy. By green infrastructure, we mean walking and cycling infrastructures. Yeah. Next slide. And even as we're talking about reducing emissions from the transport sector, a framework that is called ASI framework was discovered, and the purpose of this ASI framework is to look at the GHG emissions that result from transport sector and see how we can reduce them. So to start us off, the ASI framework has 3 components. That is the avoid measures, the shift measures, and the improve measures. Avoid measures looks at avoiding or reducing the need to travel, and even reducing then the trip length. For example, it's about more of compact cities where you can access different activities in one area without necessarily having to drive, without necessarily having to use a matatu or a car. When you talk about shift measures, this is about the modal shift to low carbon modes of transport. And also when you talk about improved measures, it's about vehicle efficiency and vehicle technology. Next slide. So when you're talking about avoid the ASI components, with me here, you can see this. This is a picture of an example of a shift measure that is happening in Nairobi, Kenya. That's the BRT. The BRT, there are different BRT stations along the Nairobi Thika Superhighway. And when you're talking about BRT is just to promote high occupancy in public transportation modes, vehicles, where we're going to be having BRT buses. And they're saying when you have high occupancy, you're going to lower the GHG emission levels because you're going to reduce the number of vehicles on the road. Next slide. So when you're talking about improved measures, yeah, this photo is on electric bikes. This is one of the projects that us as an organization, Sustainable Transport Africa, we're working on this project with one of our international partners. The main objective of this project is that we are doing a demonstration pilots of electric bikes, and also at the same time coming up with policies that are going to help in the uptake of electric mobility. So when we're talking about improved measures, it's about just looking at the vehicle technology so as to help reduce GHG emissions from the transport sector. Next slide. So even as we're talking about e-mobility, you can go back to that last slide just a little bit. Okay, so even as we're talking about e-mobility, We need to look at the e-mobility uptake measures that, that can help accelerate the transition to electric mobility. And one of those measures is about policies and regulatory measures. When you talk about policies, do we have enough policies, that, have been formulated and are being implemented to promote the uptake of e-mobility? Number two, we need to look at the incentives for purchase and the use of electric vehicles, and the initial cost of buying an electric vehicle is so high, and that is making people shy away from transitioning to electric mobility. So can we have incentives in terms of exemptions, subsidies that are going to help attract people to shift from a fossil fuel power energy to electromobility. The other thing that you need to look at, when you're trying to attract people to mobility, look at the charging infrastructure and the business model. So when you're talking about the charging infrastructure, with the charging stations be available and accessible to everyone. When you're talking about battery swapping stations, would they be also accessible and to everyone? And also, you see, when you're coming up with this charging infrastructure, you also need to look at the universal charging standards. If I'm driving from Nairobi and I'm going maybe to Moyale, we need to have a universal charging standard. This is one of the things that KET is currently working upon. Just need to have investments in raising awareness so as to make people know whatever is the technology changes that are happening in the transport sector, and also invest in research and innovation, and also support startups. I'm sorry for that. So going to the next slide on Kenya's national policies relevant to climate change, we're saying that Kenya has a comprehensive legal policy framework addressing climate action, and some of these policy frameworks, starting from the global perspective, we have the UN, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is the UNFCCC. We have the Paris Agreement. We also have regionally, we have the East African Community, the climate policy, which is to get partner states and other stakeholders on preparation and implementation of collective actions address climate change in the region, where Kenya is one of the members of the Eastern African countries. We also have regionally the Constitution of Kenya where Article 9 and Article 20 deal with mitigating climate change, environmental issues. We have the National Environmental Policy 2008, the Climate Change Act 2016, the Climate Change Action Plan 2018 to 2022, which sets out a vision for a low carbon climate resilient pathway. We also have the Climate Change Response Strategy 2010, MCA 2015, and the Energy Policy, which aims to mitigate climate change by encouraging the use of energy efficient and renewable sources. But we also need to look at the policy gaps that are in these policies. They have not given so much focus on transitioning to electric mobility. They're not given so much focus on non-motorized transport, and these gaps need to be bridged. Yeah. Next slide. So even as we are talking, shifting to sustainable low carbon transport modes, there need to be a lot of government and political will support. And this we mean government has to provide fiscal and non-fiscal incentives so as to attract people to shift from fossil fuel powered energy to electric mobility and other low carbon transport modes. For fiscal incentives, the government can, one, provide electricity tariffs for charging stations, and so as to be capped at the industry level. Number two, tax cuts, as I had earlier on said, tax cut for the initial purchase for electric vehicles and also the maintenance of electric vehicles. There need to be a lot of tax exemptions and tax cuts. And number 3, on subsidies in the transition to non-motorized transport. Subsidies when you're promoting walking and cycling infrastructure, and also support startups. There are a lot of startups in Kenya whose main objective is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are resulting from transport sector. We have startups like EcoBoda, we have Kiri EV, we have Smart Labor, and many others. So the government can work with these startups, and even as they're working with them, they're also encouraging research and innovation. For the non-fiscal incentives, the government can reduce or stop the importation of internal combustion engine vehicles. And by this, you're doing it gradually, you're not doing it at once. So maybe by 2050, you'll have a phase out of ICE vehicles, even in our country, Kenya. Number 2, the government can provide free land for charging stations. They can lease for free. They can give people that land for free so as to set up their charging stations. And by this, you'll be encouraging more people to shift to electric mobility. Number 3, we need to have restricted zones for electric vehicles only, where it's only electric vehicles which can access those areas. And by this, you're promoting low carbon zones. And in turn, it has a multiplier effect where you're doing all this. Your main goal is to achieve to help in the transition to electric mobility. We can also have car-free days where we just decide today we just are going to to practice non-motorized transport by walking, by cycling, and by this slowly you're going to achieve you're going to reduce the greenhouse gases that emanate from transport sector. The other thing, even as you're talking about promoting low carbon transport policies, we need to look at the institutional frameworks that have been set, that have already been set, so as to work towards low carbon transport. Number 1, we need to the institutional frameworks that already exist in the Ministry of Transport. We have other bodies like KENHA, Kenya National Highways Authority, we have KURA, we have KERA. All of these, they need to come together to ensure compliance in promoting low carbon transport policies. The other thing, this institutional framework, even as they are in charge of formulating and implementing policies that promote sustainable transport, sustainable urban transport, they need to look at the policy gaps that exist in these transport policies. Just as I had said earlier on, they need to give room for non-motorized transport, for MRT, for electromobility. These old policies, they need to be revised so as to give room to this to the upcoming policy to make new room for new policies. And the other thing, even as these institutional framework are coming up with new policies, the policies need to be gender inclusive. We need to look at how can we make these policies to be gender inclusive, even as we're talking about promoting walking and cycling infrastructure. Let us look at this infrastructure, safe for women, safe for children, because we say if a city is safe for a child, then it is safe for everyone. And even as we're looking at the strengthening the institutional framework, we need women leaders in the Ministry of Transport. Why? Because women, we relate to each other. We know the kind of issues we face in public transport, issues of sexual harassment, issues of being seen as inferior. We need the top managerial positions. Yes. So to continue, we also in terms of gender, we need participation from the conception, design to implementation stages of policy making, and also about e-mobility standards, where KEBS is now working on the e-mobility standards. All this, they need to have a collective collective actions so as to achieve a common goal. The other thing is on financial strategies. So we need a budget allocation for sustainable low carbon transport. One, globally, we have the Global Climate Fund, which is under the UNFCCC. And this Global Climate Fund is a financing mechanism which can be now used to finance sustainable low carbon transport under the Mitigation Act. We also have multilateral assistance, and under the multilateral climate fund, we have the Green Climate Fund, we have the Adaptation Fund, we have the Global Environmental Facility and Climate Investment Facilities. And by this, we're saying that developed countries should help the developing countries, to support them in fighting and mitigating and adapting to climate change. The other thing, we have carbon market trading, which was actually mentioned at the COP26, and this can be done by providing incentives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by implementing a market for emission allowances and redeemable credits. COP26 mentioned that developing countries will want assurance on the $100 billion USD dollars that was promised, in COP15 in 2009, that developing countries will be given $100 billion every year to help them adapt to the impacts of climate change, and that promise needs to be fulfilled. So in Kenya, there need to be, county budget allocation to help, fight GHG, or rather reduce greenhouse gases that emanate from transport sector. Kisumu County is really doing good in this. They have really come up with a good non-motorized transport infrastructure, and other counties need to follow suit to continue. Even as I say, that you need to have a collective action from different stakeholders, and this ranges from government to private sector, and also by private sector we mean the manufacturers, the guys in the private sector who actually provide public transportation, where that is the case in Kenya, that public transportation is privately owned. We also have efforts by car manufacturers, by NGOs, by research and academia, all these partners that are involved, in the transport sector. They need to have representatives who will come together, at the decision-making table, and come up with ways on how we can promote sustainable low carbon transport. So the other thing is on data collection, and we're saying that data collection will facilitate research and innovation, which will now inform decision-making. Mostly it is done the other way. You first make a decision and then you go to the ground. To collect data. So we first need to collect data, which will inform decision making. Also, mass media to help in raising awareness to create demand for consumers for electric mobility. So next slide. So we are saying that the government has done, its bit in providing transition to low carbon transport solutions by ensuring, there's an abundance of renewable energy in the national grid, which presently stands at 60%. So for this to be aggressive, there is need, to sensitize people on the need and benefits of sustainable low carbon transport solutions so as to drive demand for low carbon transport modes. So that's why we're saying that the uptake of electric mobility greatly relies on the mechanisms put in place by the government and the people's willingness to accept the technology. So to conclude, in the area of budgetary allocation, we've identified that there are no specific guidelines to inform the government on how much should be assigned to sustainable low carbon transport. And to this end, this is an area that us as an organization, Sustainable Transport Africa, together with the like-minded partners, would be interested in conducting a research study, one, to establish a threshold budgetary allocation to just to determine, the amount of budget that can be directed to sustainable low carbon transport solutions. And the other one, when you talked about the health effects of that result from transport sector, when black carbon is produced by the incomplete fuel combustion. So we need to establish the amount of revenue that government is using to treat respiratory diseases that result from greenhouse gases, from inhaling those black carbon particles that are as a result from the emissions from the transport sector. So those are the two gaps that we've identified, and maybe more research can be done and perhaps come up with solutions on how to rectify those issues. So that has been my time. So my conclusion would be, let us make our cities more desirable to live in. So yeah, so that has been my time. So now we go to the next slide, to the next part of the session where we have questions and comments. Thank you so much.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Women in Transport Africa 2021 conference, and I welcome you all to my session today where we'll be speaking on climate action in the transport sector. The topic, my session today is climate action in the transport sector. My name is Zelda Kerubo. I serve as a junior advisor for the GIZ Kenya Energy Transport and Climate Change Cluster based in Nairobi. I am so sorry, cut. I am so sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this session for the Women in Transport in Africa 2021 conference. My name is Zelda Kerubo, and I'll take you through this session today. Today's session, I'll be speaking on climate action in the transport sector. Again, my name is Zelda Kerubo. I serve as a junior advisor for GIZ Kenya under the Energy, Transport and Climate Change Cluster. We are always on the move. Transport is essential to all in the backbone of our lives, supporting trade, growing economies, allowing us access to opportunities, as well as connecting family and friends from all aspects and all areas of the world. And our own human development has allowed us to be able to traverse through the open oceans, has been able us to conquer vast lands, has been able for us to go through long distance flights, and even now space does not seem as far as the distance it used to be. And I confess myself, I do enjoy traveling, hardly saying no to visit new places, as well as my bucket list just keeps on growing. However, our current transport sector as it is has a very negative impact on the environment. It is very polluting, increasing demand for natural resources such as oil, metals, minerals, and rubber, as well as noise pollution, water pollution, and waste generation. And I think we all experience this from all parts of the world, wherever we are. The transport sector, in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, which we know are a key contributor to climate change at the moment. Globally, transport contributes about a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions. And this is a very big, oh God, we'll cut there. So let me start. Globally, sorry. So according to the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change under the UNFCCC, transport contributes a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's the fastest growing than in any other sector. Greenhouse gases such as CO2, methane, nitrous oxides are harmful in excess amounts in that they form a blanket over our atmosphere, which prevents heat from the earth escaping to space, which now causes an average increase in the global temperatures. And this trapped heat is now what is absorbed by our lands and our oceans that will lead to the melting of glaciers, as well as causing an imbalance in our atmosphere that results in extreme events such as drought, floods, heat waves, tsunamis affecting all areas of our lives. And the transport sector is not spared in terms of vulnerability to climate change. Extreme temperatures cause thermal expansion of bridge, rail joints, ground surfaces, and paved grounds. Unpredictable rainfall patterns cause rising of water levels, which lead to drowning of roads, flooding of bridges, rail tunnels, and overloading our drainage infrastructure. Increased cases of erosion will also lead to mudslides and landslides. Increased storms and stronger winds endanger suspension bridges and cable-stayed bridges, as well as damaging lighting fixtures and signboards. Rising sea levels will lead to the drowning of coastal transport infrastructure. Increased salinity levels reduce the structural strength through corrosion of steel reinforcements in concrete infrastructure. This is why we can no longer continue with business as usual, but we must all come together to find solutions in which transport can reduce its impact on the environment, and as well as how we can develop our transport infrastructure to adapt to the impending changes within our climate. And I'd like to present these solutions in 3 principles. Number 1 being to avoid, number 2 to shift, and number 3 to improve. Number 1, avoid. Simply let us avoid traveling. It's that easy. How we change our behaviors, how we ask ourselves before we make that trip, is it necessary for me to make that trip? Look at us right now. We are having this conference through our virtual participation. 2020 has shown us that we can actually work from home, and even 2021, some of us are still working from home. So how much greenhouse gas emissions have we saved just from reducing our movements from point A to point B? Number 2 is to shift. Are we able to shift our current transport systems to use alternative fuels as well as renewable energy? Renewable energy every single day continues to be more accessible, more affordable, and more reliable, from solar, wind to hydrogen. Number 2, are we also able to use public transport, increase the use of public transport? We have buses, trains, carpooling, ride sharing. Are we able to shift from private means and use more public transport? Number 3, are we able to use non-motorized transport? I think the greatest invention we have is simply our legs. How often do we forget that we have actually the most efficient, the most environmentally friendly means of transport, and that's by simply taking a walk. We might also ride a bike. We might also support cycling. These are non-motorized means of transport which allow us to maintain a healthy lifestyle, as well as reduce the air pollution that is a result of other polluting means of transport, as well as promoting an active lifestyle that we all need, especially during this time. Another aspect is shifting to electric mobility. I have to put a special mention on this because we may be able to support walking and cycling and motorized means of transport, but we will not forget that mobility is essential to all of us. And in Kenya and in Africa in general, I've been able to mention a few companies that are leading this shift to electric mobility. We have companies such as Wetu, which are leading electric mobility in Western Kenya, providing fishermen with boats, electric boats. Opibus in Kenya converts the internal combustion engines of large land cruisers, which they use, or they are used in the national parks. So not only also preventing pollutions in our national parks. Drive Electric, who have done the study that we have there on comparing electric vehicles and internal combustion vehicles in Kenya, which is an interesting study that I think we should all be able to go through. Kira Motors in Uganda operates the electric buses. We have international companies such as Volkswagen, who are promoting more and more electric mobility within Africa. And the study that we have there is on the Kenya Electric Mobility Fact Sheet. Through this fact sheet, we are able to compile, together with the State Department of Transport, all the necessary details that you will need in order to support your shift to electric mobility. Again, non-motorized transport. For example, in Rwanda, we have the car-free days in Rwanda, I believe also in Ethiopia and Uganda. And it simply is able to show us that really our cities in a large extent have been built for cars, but then we are the heart of the city. So why don't we now provide the people with opportunity for them to enjoy their streets? We also have skating opportunities, especially, for example, the picture shows there in Nairobi. We also have the critical mass event in Nairobi, I believe, which happens every other month, which brings out many cyclists to show us that really our roads should be able to accommodate cyclists as well. I'll give us a question. For example, those who have visited Nairobi, the picture on your bottom right, this is Luthuli Avenue. If anyone of us has been there a few years back, and just to see the difference that reducing or limiting the parking space, as well as limiting or providing walkways for the passengers, how such a big difference it has made in terms of the air quality in such an area, as well as just the free movements of people within such an area. And I think such are the progress that we should be implementing in our cities and towns. Number 3 will be on improving efficiency. How are we able now to improve the current vehicles and modes of transport that we have at the moment? Number 1, again, just to compare the internal combustion engine vehicles, the conventional vehicles, and the electric motors. Do we know that actually our internal combustion engines, over 70% of the fuel, of the power, is actually lost to heat, and only 30% used in propelling us forward, unlike in electric vehicles, where over 90% of the power is now used in the propelling forward and only 10 lost to friction and heat. Number 2, practice eco-driving. How are we able to make sure that our vehicles are driving efficient? Number 1, just simply maintaining our vehicles in the right state, as well as replacing the air filters accordingly. Number 3 would be improving the quality of fuels. Are we able to make sure that the fuels that we use in our vehicles are low emission, so that we reduce the amount of emissions that we produce through our transport system? Number 3, another point will be on renewing the vehicle fleets. I think all around us, we can see so many old vehicles, so many old matatus, which that technology is not up to date, in the sense that they are still heavily polluting, unlike the new technology that we have at the moment, where vehicles are more fuel efficient and reducing their emissions. Other actions that we could implement, this is on government, reducing the fuel subsidies and also increasing fuel taxes, just to discourage people from investing in actually dirty fossil fuels, but rather encouraging them to invest in other renewable sources of energy. For the manufacturers, how they are able to develop their vehicles in such a way that is environmentally friendly, for example, and efficient. For example, heavy vehicles tend to consume so much energy, as well as increase the consequent greenhouse gas emissions. But if we have lighter vehicles, we are able to reduce the amount of emissions that we produce. Fuel economy standards as well is just making sure that we know the type of fuel that we are actually using in our vehicles. While in the maritime and in the aviation sector, we can have electronic taxing of aeroplanes. For example, the image that you can see there, other than the airplane running its engine while it's taxiing at the airport, we are able to power it to renewable electricity that is now able to run the engines as it waits for passengers to board. Also, that same can happen while ships are at dock in the coast. Another aspect we must not forget in the transport sector is the infrastructure. The infrastructure that we have, be it roads, be it the bridges, all of this must also now be able to adapt to the already changing climate. And this we can do in several ways. In engineering, for example, let's have material specifications that these materials can be used to withstand the changing climate. And also in our designs, we are able to take into consideration the expected geographical changes, for example, rising water levels. Another aspect we can do is review our current infrastructure development standards. The problem is the climate is moving so fast faster than how we are in terms of reviewing our infrastructure development standards. Number one, are we adding protective structures against the rising sea levels? Are we retaining walls against landslides when we are building through unstable grounds? And also, are we ensuring there's a provision of cycling lanes, walkways, and green spaces just to encourage more and more people to use non-motorized means of transport, that's reducing the greenhouse gas emissions? We can also make sure that we have proper environmental management in the development of our infrastructure. For example, mangrove rehabilitation along the coast to prevent the coastal infrastructure from being washed away by the rising seawaters, as well as increase the maintenance and development of early warning system that is able to prepare us ahead for any danger that we may have from rising dangers. All this can only happen by capacity building. This is promoting broad awareness for climate change in the transport sector through, for example, public campaigns and social media. We can also develop local expertise surrounding climate change and transport, be it in our education systems, through research and through trainings. For example, in Kenya, the Climate Change Act of 2016 called for the establishment of the Climate Change Coordination Unit in all government departments. And as GIZ, through the transport project, we were able to support the State Department of Transport through trainings, as well as creating the reports, which is required according to the law on the policy every year of the climate actions within each sector. And for example, you can see that is the 2019-2020 transport sector annual report, but we are also able to have the 2018-2019 sector. And through our support, we are able also to support the State Department of Transport in improving systems and techniques for monitoring and reporting on CO2 emissions. We are also able to develop data resources for evidence-based decision making, as well as a training session on greenhouse gas emission quantification and mitigation. We are also able to build our capacity through partnerships and networking. For example, all of us attending this Women in Transport in Africa conference, we are here to learn from one another. We are here to share experiences so that we are able to see what are some of the solutions and what are some of the challenges that we face. And finally, with all these actions, we are able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, be it promoting good health and well-being, ensuring access to affordable and clean energy, promoting industry, innovation, and sustainable infrastructure, building sustainable communities and sustainable cities. Of paramount is climate action, as well as promoting partnership for the goals. Thank you very much.